Homage to the Triple Gem. So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at Nikapiti Aranya, and basically news continues as usual, not a lot to report. So I was asked maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago by somebody on Discord, how do you deal with doubt in an age when there's no single recitation of the Buddha's teachings? And he was listing these two very famous ajahns who were going back and forth over the Buddha's doctrine of not self or no self. So kind of arguing about that. So there is a classic sutta on this called the Kalama Sutta that the Buddha gives, and it almost fits the mold of this question exactly. And the Buddha is asked by the Kalamas, basically, how do you determine what's a true teaching when one teacher comes and states their own doctrine is right and disparages the doctrines of others, and another teacher comes and states that their doctrine is right and disparages the doctrines of others? And the Buddha says, he gives a long list of things not to go by, kind of, don't go by faith or with a thought that's contemplative as our teacher, or out of like a long-standing tradition, or even by reasoning or cogitation. He said, when you yourself know that these things are praiseworthy, these things are leading to wholesome qualities, paraphrasing, and they're recommended to be undertaken by the wise, then those things you should enter upon and develop in. And the opposite as well, when you know things are blameworthy. So there's a couple of important points that come out of that. One of them is that it's something that you have to know yourself. The second is that those kind of things, those qualities that are to be known by yourself as praiseworthy or blameworthy, those are things that the wise should also praise and blame. So it's a bit of a tight spot when one doesn't actually know who to trust in terms of teachers or in terms of teachings, and one also doesn't have the skills oneself to make an absolute judgment on what's right or what's wrong. So there's different ways that doubt can arise. Like doubt can arise over like intellectual propositions, like did the Buddha teach no self or not self as a strategy? And one of the best ways to overcome these intellectual doubts is basically to investigate this oneself. So this is different than what the Buddha describes as knowing those qualities that are wholesome or unwholesome for oneself. But I guess you could fit it in there under right, could come under right view, knowing whether this view is a wholesome and true view or not. So in order to know something for oneself, especially if one doesn't initially have the skill to judge, it essentially requires a bit of just like plunging in there and giving it a try. So if it's something intellectual, then essentially one has to just break the books out and cross-examine what two competing lines of reasoning are saying and actually try to argue against them. Try to argue against one, try to argue against the other. One can try to argue for one, for the other, using whatever sutta references one can. And then in these arguments, one doesn't want to lose one's attitude of respect, but there's different mental modes that one can take on. And sometimes one of the best mental modes for uncovering whether teachings are true or not is to take on like a highly investigative approach. In other words, nothing is to be left uninvestigated. Every point, every sentence, every word is to be investigated for its truthfulness or falsehood in line with the Buddha's teachings. And one can try to pull it apart, try to take the argument and rip it to shreds and see if it holds up to scrutiny. Now, it's always possible to find like little tiny holes in arguments generally and nitpick on those. And that's not necessarily going to be something that's useful. Sometimes debates or like looking into the Buddha's teachings devolve into looking at semantics, like the way that a person phrases something or not. But in these larger scale teachings like this, the Buddha teaches there's no self ontologically. In other words, it's hard to distinguish that position from annihilationism or fatalism, actually. We kind of, you can look at different ways that people phrase that, and then look in the suttas for the support. And people often cite suttas in support of this, and the counterposition also cites suttas. So what you want to do is to take those suttas, gather them all together, and think to yourself, which one has the theory or explanation that best explains this collection of suttas related to this topic. So if one investigates this thoroughly, then one can develop an opinion on one's own based on the evidence. And in a sense, this can be knowing for oneself in terms of the pure intellectual theory. Of course, one won't totally confirm that, and one won't totally confirm that unless one becomes an arahant. As far as knowing who's wise and who's not, as one is going along in this process of, say, intellectual investigation, then one can start to see which person is putting their arguments together in a more coherent way and which person isn't. And oftentimes, looking at a topic like that, which is, a relatively large topic about a core teaching in Theravada Buddhism, you find other works that these people have written. So what you kind of want to look for is a certain type of, there can be people who engage in like an intellectual, consistent intellectual honesty, or people who sometimes engage in an intellectual dishonesty. It doesn't mean that they're lying, but it may mean that they hide the facts to enforce their position. So this most often happens when people take on an ideology that's external to Buddhism, like a political ideology, or something like this. It'd be often a political ideology external to Buddhism that they then try to cram the Buddhist teachings into. So if one finds in the course of one's studying that a person who is a respected scholar is doing this, then it raises a question mark over how well they can be trusted wholesale in their interpretations of the Buddhist teachings on an intellectual level. Doesn't mean that everything they write is going to be wrong. It's just, do we know that this is praised or criticized by the wise, and we can trust that this person is a wise person who praises what's to be praised and criticizes what's to be criticized. So as one goes along and investigates for oneself, one's ability to evaluate people in this intellectual sense can grow. And as that ability grows and one can take advice from people who are good advisors, then that feeds back into one's ability to know these things directly for oneself. Here one is talking about on an intellectual level, kind of the more that one reads, the more that one discusses with people who have an intellectual right view, then the more one's own understanding of that intellectually can be clarified. And if a right view is really, really well investigated, it actually becomes quite difficult to shake that view. If a person is a really honest investigator and really pulls all the little pieces apart, any small piece of doubt, they investigate it until they find out what's going on with that doubt. By the way, that's a really important thing to do, because sometimes the very small, hazy things we feel like we don't fully understand, it's actually there that it's linked to a larger scale misunderstanding, a larger scale confusion in the Buddhist teachings. That's not quite lining up with another concept we've developed or we've approved of, and there's a discrepancy there. So actually, when one goes down these little tiny holes of doubt, one sometimes ends up coming out the other end and looking over the whole of one's views. But it's a very important thing to do, because if one goes and investigates all these various things in this way, pulling them apart to the very smallest details that one feels are necessary to allay one's doubt, then that view actually becomes very difficult to shake if one does that honestly. If one's doing that honestly, it's much more meticulous, it takes time, but it's more difficult to shake. And so this right there, when one investigates this way, supported by one's own investigation, supported by the wise words of another, then that can help quite a lot to eliminate doubt, say on an intellectual level about teaching, say, is it no self or not self, or some other controversies that might be there in the Buddhist teachings. The other good thing about investigating this way, so that all the pieces of the puzzle of one's views fit together and don't really have doubt contained within them so much, is that anytime some new teaching comes, like somebody could say something very strange, or something that's like partway strange but is a little off, then if that view has been well developed intellectually all around, then one can usually see which part of the view it doesn't fit with. And because one has investigated all the parts within one's view, one can know very quickly, much more quickly than usual, why it doesn't fit as a whole. So it can offer quite a lot of protection against adopting wrong views that can then lead to wrong practice. As far as doubts about how to proceed in one's practice, that can be something very, very different than intellectual doubts about some theoretical point in the Buddha's teachings. Proceeding in one's practice can be like wandering through a forest, and somebody may have given you a sketch, you may have developed, learned skills from people, how to use a compass, how to do, how to say, like in this metaphor, like trap food or or scavenge food, learning how to learn how to filter water, learned all these survival skills that one needs and navigation skills that one needs to get through the forest. But the thing about this is that every obstacle that one might face in that forest can't be listed in a book. You can learn the principles, you can learn about the techniques that one can use, but one has to learn to apply those creatively to find one's way out of a forest that one is in alone without a guide. And so essentially we're all alone in the forest of our minds. I mean, people can point things out to us, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to navigate out of the wilderness of the mind to try to find a place of safety out of that. And so what it means is that here the expression, when one knowing for oneself, essentially has a lot to do with testing something out, making a mistake, coming back from another angle, making a mistake, coming back from another angle, making a mistake, and then finally finding the solution. And a lot of what one does in one's meditation practice can track this way. And, much of the time, kind of the obstacles that one finds in one's meditation practice can be unique to one's own mind. And the English language, or even any language, it's very difficult to cover all the nuances that are there and the ways that one can direct one's mind to counter them. So it's really the skill of a warrior that one develops in taking, say, the core teachings that one learns from the Buddha, that one learns from teachers, and then applying them in one's practice to actually try to eliminate the defilements in one's mind. If one can do this successfully, then one can gain a lot of confidence about that particular path for moving forward to end that defilement. It's like if one is wandering totally lost in the woods and then comes across a path where the compass direction's pointing in the right, compass direction's pointing correctly, it seems level, it seems flat, one can see it going on for quite a distance, and the map that one had been told about talks about paths that look like this. It doesn't mean that it's the right path, but what it does mean is that one can get more and more confidence going down that path. And kind of, so one traverses it further. If it looks like all the features line up, then one can gain even more confidence in that particular path. So in a similar way, when one takes the Buddha's teachings and learns to apply them to actually trying to eliminate one's defilements, takes the teachings of one's teachers, learns to apply them to the practical task of eliminating the defilements that are in one's own mind, that right there can give quite a lot of confidence. So when one sees the difficulties that one was fighting against fall away in real time, or one is successful against them and climb that one hill, there's higher hills ahead, but climb that one hill, that can give confidence. That can give confidence to the mind and help to allay doubt that, number one thing, this is something, can give confidence to a person, this is something that I'm capable of doing. Another thing, it can give confidence that what the Buddha taught is correct. And a third thing, it can give confidence in one's own discernment, in the process that one used to find a solution to that problem. Because although the particulars of the problems may differ and the actual solutions may differ, the pattern in which one searches for solutions to these problems in one's practice can have overlap. It's going to involve effort. It's going to involve testing things out in various creative ways. It's going to involve certain principles. There's going to be certain principles that one can, general characteristics that one can start to recognize that signify that one is on the right course or on the wrong course. Those can also get updated. But all these things can give confidence to the mind and help allay doubt. As far as knowing what types of people are to be considered the wise ones, who will praise or criticize behaviors that we have or paths that we're going down, in ways that are in line with the Dhamma, so that we know that our actions are to be praised or criticized by the wise. This also can have overlap with the way that one finds whether people are wise in intellectual pursuits. So a lot of finding like a good teacher or somebody who can guide one well on the path, help one out. Ultimately, it's one's own responsibility, but help one out. A lot of this actually has to do with connection. So there's many people who can give good advice, and really good advice actually, that's spot on. But sometimes the advice that goes straight to a person's heart comes from people who one might have like a connection with. One likes them for some reason, and the way that they speak seems to make sense to one. Can hear the same advice from somebody else, it might not feel like it goes as deep. So if a person gives one advice and one tests that advice out and it works, then that's a way that one can start to know, okay, this person, their advice that they're giving me is good. I think that what they criticize or what they praise may also be in line. But then one also wants to investigate them and their behavior. Would they say or do anything in such a way that they deliberately know that they're leading you down the wrong path? Or, maybe like sacrifice your well-being in the Dhamma for their own material gain in some large way. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that people could say that. Are they themselves people who are practicing sincerely? Are they themselves people who have good qualities that one could emulate? One investigates them in their actions, in their words, in their speech, and in the advice that they give to one in this way. Then that's another way one can start to see this is a wise person or this is not a wise person. The things that they praise are to be understood as being praised by the wise, or the things that they criticize are to be understood as being criticized by the wise. So it's, again, this type of process which requires testing that person's advice out, putting it into practice, and then seeing what kind of results one gets. Now, again, people who try to help us, it's not like they know every corner of our mind. So there might be times when they give advice that's correct, but actually the solution that was good for one was a different course, possibly. And it doesn't mean you dismiss their advice. It just means that you put it on the shelf for that time being, or take a portion of it, what you find is really helpful at that time, and then maybe the full scope of their advice might be helpful at another time later. So this is one of the reasons why when one goes to stay in practice traditions and ask for advice about practice, the teachers often don't tell you things like, do this, do that, do this. Well, especially in the Thai forest tradition or other more teacher-student-based traditions rather than like a technique-based tradition. One of the reasons is because of the complexities of the mind, and they might be able to get a sense that you're going in this wrong direction, this will be the general solution, but it's hard to say like exactly what one should do at that moment. I mean, you can say things, you can say stop doing this or do this, but the actual direction of one's own mind, again, is one's own responsibility. So as one learns to practice in this way and develop one's own skills, develop one's own confidence in one's ability to solve problems and the means that one uses to solve problems, this is a way to eliminate doubt. As one gains more confidence in the words of other people, as one associates with them, as one sees the effects of their words, sees the way that they behave, sees the effects of their behavior, this is something that can lead to more confidence. And these two things interconnect and reinforce one another, one's ability to investigate the teachings intellectually and one's ability to put them into practice. Both these things bring confidence. Because a lot of what pulls a person down is when they're trying to overcome some negative quality. They get swamped by that negative quality. They get swamped by anger, get swamped by greed, get swamped by delusion, get swamped by fear, and get knocked down because of those things. But so long as one stands back up, so long as one continues to investigate, continues to test it out, and using these means of intellectual investigation, putting one's own solutions into practice, following the words of other people, it's when whatever that defilement was, whatever that bad habit was, gets defeated, gets knocked back, falls away, or can even be eliminated completely. That's when one can really gain confidence and one can really eliminate doubt. So all the strategies that the Buddha gives for practice, for for eliminating our defilements, these are things that in and of themselves lead to the elimination of doubt. They lead to a true knowledge for people, a knowledge that their defilements are wearing away, a knowledge that their good qualities are increasing, and in the most significant areas of the path, a knowledge that their defilements have been worn through and that they can't fall away from certain good qualities. So it's always worthwhile to take these things up, to investigate things intellectually, to look for good teachers, and to develop one's own capabilities in solving problems. Because doubt remains so long as one has not succeeded. But if one does succeed, then one can eliminate doubt.